Hi, my name is Matt Williams with Camera Ambassador, and today I'm bringing you the Sony FS5. I've had a chance to work with this camera for the last couple of days, and there are some things that are really interesting on this camera that I hope get applied to many others across the board. There are some other things that were pretty big letdowns, but we have a workaround for some of those. So let's start with the good. My favorite thing about this camera, and it's not sexy and it's not, an incredibly groundbreaking, well, it kind of is. It's the neutral density. The ND on this camera is incredible. Now, what do you mean, how can ND be incredible? What I mean is that you can go in incremental stops of ND on this camera that start very, very low up to extremely high. Now, the way that I understand that this is done is that there's a piece of glass that goes in front of the sensor, and there are two wires attached to this, and they send an electrical pulse to the glass, and the more of a pulse that's sent, the darker the glass gets, and they've figured out exactly how much electricity needs to go to the glass to make it darker for each one of these stops. Now, what this means is that we now have another variable to be able to use with our camera. It's no longer just the shutter angle, and it's no longer just the f-stop and the ISO, and we got to work with these three to get the image we want, and then mess with the lighting too. That makes this camera something that I believe might be one of the best running gun cameras on the market today. So let's go for the next thing. The battery life on this is incredibly long. I mean, I was able to operate this for about 6.5 hours while going through menus and setups, and not just recording, but actually making the camera really work. I mean, I was recording, I didn't have many assets that were attached to the camera. I didn't have anything more than just the onboard monitor that comes with it, but it still went for about 6.5 hours. Now, what that means to me is that if I want to take this camera out and I want to go do a shoot, if I bring this and one backup battery, just because maybe in colder temperatures it's not going to operate as well, or, well, we're in Chicago, so colder temperatures is usually what we get, I'll probably be set for most of the day. No camera bag, no extra anything or whatever. I can take this and I can just go. And that's really, really beneficial, and that's something that we've kind of been lacking in the department as far as how long batteries last. The other camera that I'm very happy with the battery lifespan of is the C100, and that is a great long-lasting battery life camera if you keep it basic and you start adding things onto it, and then you're gonna lose your battery power very fast. Anyway, moving on. The next thing that I love about this camera is the center scan. The center scan on this camera it's a really cool feature. Basically what we're doing here is we're taking a 4K sensor and we're just looking at the center 1080 of that sensor. Then using just that center 1080, we're magnifying the image by 2. So I have a 25 mil in here. I'm able to turn this into a 50. Now, obviously you can take this and apply this to every single lens that has the Sony E mount, but the fact is you can double your lenses. It's kind of cool. And the fact that I didn't see any clarity loss, I didn't see any issues with it, I thought there was going to be something. And I pushed it and I tried to find there an issue with the center scan somehow, but I really couldn't. Now, the next thing I'm looking at is autofocus on the face. I love that we have autofocus on this camera and that we can autofocus on somebody's face, and that brings your crew down one more person, which, in a big commercial sense is not really a great thing, because I know some focus pullers who crush it. And autofocus on a camera will probably not be replacing focus pullers for any time in the near to slightly distant future, but the fact is that we're getting there, and that means that our crews are going to go smaller and our budgets are going to be able to allocate to different places instead of to somebody pulling focus on a lens. Now, this might not be a big deal if you're working on a giant budget feature film, but if you're working on a small indie documentary that you're trying to pinch every penny that you can, this might be a lifesaver for you. Now, it does not snap to your face and start going as quickly as Canon 5D Mark III that I just did some reviews on, but it is pretty quick and it is pretty accurate. So that's a big plus in my book. Now, next thing I want to talk about is just really briefly the fact that this camera is incredibly light. I mean, this thing is, I feel like I'm carrying, I don't know, it's not even a grocery bag. It's not even, I don't even know what I can equate this to, but I would have no problem running and moving around with this all day long. And then obviously for dropping this onto a Ronin or dropping it onto a Movi or a drone or whatever, obviously people have been doing it like crazy and for good reason. So that's another big plus. Now, the RAW on this camera, it looks incredible. So I hear. I don't know because I didn't spend $600 on the top of the price tag of this camera in order to be able to see and understand how does this camera look raw. So we're looking at this camera from what you get when you open the box. Obviously the Odyssey is a really big addition to this camera and you can do so much more with that. But that wasn't something that came in the box. So we're just looking at what do you get when you buy the FS5. There are a lot of buttons on the side. That's beneficial, right? A lot of buttons on this side. And what that means is that you don't have to go into the menu system as much, which is super convenient because the menu system is atrocious on the Sony cameras. I mean, I love what's going on inside of this camera here, but in order to work around it and work with it, I feel like I'm fighting this system in order to be able to make the camera work the way that I want it to. I feel like everything that I try to do with it has got some little caveat or a little thing, that a hoop that I have to jump through in some weird way, shape, or form, and that's not really what I want when I look at a camera. Granted, I understand you put a little bit of time and effort into this thing and you'll be whizzing around it in no time, and that's wonderful. So what do we have as far as our buttons go? Well, we have our switches for our low, medium, and high, which have been on cameras since the FS100. And then we have the white balance, the preset, the auto. I kind of like that you can program everything on here. What I don't like, though, jumping back to the ISO for a second, is that there's always seems to be a little if-then with this camera. And that's something that I don't want to have to keep in mind. If shooting in 4K, your ISO is then 3200. If shooting in 1080p, your native ISO is then 1000. So there's a lot of things like that with this camera, and I don't want to have to be keeping all of these limitations in my mind every time I'm going to change something on the camera. Another one of these if-then scenarios is if the autofocus plus face tracking is enabled on the camera, then you cannot manually control your shutter. That seems like something that should have been taken care of in some sort of firmware update or something, but apparently from what I've understood from researching online, it's more of a hardware compatibility issue between, that's as far as I got. They're not going to come out with a fix for this, is what I understand, and that's all I needed to know. Another if-then scenario is when we're looking at the XAVC-L recording codec. So the issue I have with this, it's not in the way that it works, right? So I don't have a problem with the fact that XAVC-L records what's moving and what's going on, and every 12 frames takes a look at everything else that's not moving and says, all right, freeze that. We're gonna hold that. We're not gonna record that stuff that's not moving. We're not gonna record this camera because it's not moving. We're only gonna record what is moving. I don't have a problem with that. I understand and I believe in the technology. What I don't believe in is my computer's ability to be able to unbox all of this and then to be able to allow me to edit very smoothly. I don't believe in that. And that has been proven to be the case many times over as people try to take their 4K footage they shot on their beautiful Sony FS5 and bring it in, and then all of a sudden they're just wasted in rendering times, and it's too much. I would rather record in AVC HD and then be able to film at 1080p and be totally happy with that. I'm comfortable being able to create the frame that I want to and then not have to worry about whether I want to punch in or if I want to be able to pull back on the highlights a little bit more, be able to have a little bit more depth of resolution. I know I can do what I want to do with 1080. So if I can do what I want to do with 1080, then I'm not going to go and start messing around. So to me, this is a 1080 camera, and that's no problem to me. And maybe to you, this is a 4K camera, and the editing process is no problem to you, and that doesn't matter. You want that 4K, and that's fine. You have to figure out what is it about each camera that works for you and doesn't, so that when you go to rent or when you go to buy, then you can actually know, no. See, that would be great if I was doing this drama or something like that, but I want to do this action film, and so now I want to go with this camera. So there's a lot of different things that you can consider when picking up a camera. So let's go through a couple more issues that I found with this camera before we start discussing who this camera is particularly for. Now, the super slow motion on this camera is pretty cool. I really dug on it quite a bit. You can see one of our other videos that we have, we did a test of the super slow motion, and it's very simple to use, but there are a few things. There's one big, I got a problem. You can only record in super slow motion for a very short window. You can only record in super slow motion for about 8 seconds. And after that, your camera needs to digest everything that's going on, because this is a small body and there's a lot going on in here. But most of the space, or a lot of the space, is being taken up by two things. One is circuit boards, and two are heat sinks. So a lot of the space that's inside this camera is being used to burn off heat. So they didn't have the processing power to put in this camera to be able to process the super slow motion as fast as they wanted to be able to. And that's just something that, we have to deal with, and it's a trade-off of having a smaller body and a smaller price tag and being able to, we have to plan out our shots in super slow motion. Or do we have to decide, do we really want to use super slow motion? One thing I have to say about most Sony cameras that I've worked with and I've used is that when I get the footage in and I start reviewing it, it always looks just a bit magenta-y. With these purples and these pinks that are coming out of skin tones that aren't really there. I'm not sure where we're picking them up from or how they're coming in, but I can say that those magenta tones can be an asset if you're doing like a drama or a thriller or something like that, because cold and magenta go really well for making us feel insecure and cut off from the rest of the world. So we can find something that we can use that for beneficially. One thing that I found that was very beneficial to countering this is that we have 9 different picture profiles to choose from. Now we can program all of these to be exactly what we want, which is incredible, because this means to me that if I know my shots and I know exactly what's going to be happening, and as a DP I'll know that every single time before I go into a shot, this is the gamma we're going to be using for pretty much the entire shoot, and this is the color mode that I want you to be using for this scene or this scene or this scene, or we're going to have a super slow motion scene where let's pick a profile for that. What's that going to be like? So you have a lot of options to be able to shift this image in any way that you see fit, and we did a test on that as well, both in S-Log2 and S-Log3, so be sure to check that one out. Now, the last knock I'm going to give to this camera is that if the auto features on this camera would be removed, it would be a much simpler camera to work with. It would just be so much simpler. We're taking up so much real estate on the side over here with everything that is auto this and auto that. We have a full auto button up at the top. Our buttons are pre-programmed and preset for the camera to say, hey, when they hit this, they want to go auto. And no, that's not what I want to do. So you start using this side grip over here, and that function button becomes your best friend as you start cycling through everything that you want to and figuring out exactly how you want your camera to be set up. Now, all of these issues can be easily overcome if you pay for the Odyssey Q7 and if you pay for the software to be able to upgrade the camera to shoot RAW. Now, why is it that we need to pay for software to do something for our camera that we feel like it should already do? Well, it could, but this camera released, and this camera is for a group of people who don't care that much about shooting RAW, but care more about the intricacies of what it can do very well. The RAW is for people who want to shoot RAW. So these are we're going to be looking at two very different cameras. The FS5 and the FS5 with the RAW unlocked and with the ability to have the Q7 on there so that we can shoot multiple incredible shots without any slowing down or trying to make something happen or internal workings that are struggling. Don't have any issues like that. We can record 2K, super slow motion at 240 frames per second, twice as many frames as what we're able to record right now, and it looks beautiful. Everything I've seen has looked incredible. But again, if you have $2,000 laying around and you don't really have any use for it, or this would be a good use for it, then I would say it might be a worthy upgrade, but you have to make that decision. I definitely would not upgrade this camera to the Odyssey and the RAW upgrade. If you play with this camera and work with it, and you're not a fan of it, and you say, oh, this'll make it do what I want it to do, and this'll make it the camera, you might want to think about going a different direction, because it's still, at the end of the day, going to be this camera. And if you're going to always have the Odyssey on it every single time you're going to roll, then great. But if you're doing some, run and gun guerrilla shooting, then that RAW and the Odyssey might not be something you can use every time you go out to go shoot. So be careful with that. You can also get LUTs with the Odyssey, which, we don't have on this camera. So that's why I'm going to get to that I don't think that this is really a cinema camera, because you need to be able to see what it's going to look like after a small grade has been done, even a light one. You need to be able to see that. S-Lug is hard to expose sometimes. You're not sure, should I overexpose, should I underexpose? I want to make sure I don't have noise here, but I also want to make sure. It's very tricky. So being able to see a lookup table and being able to know exactly, or not maybe exactly, but pretty close to what the final product is going to look like is immensely helpful. So that's another benefit of getting the Odyssey. Who is this camera for? Who should go out and buy this camera? Well, you should definitely go buy this camera if you're going to be somebody who's working on a documentary, working outdoors, filming a nature show or a hunting show or something like that. Filming something with lots of light where you can use this ND to its absolute full potential. That is one of my favorite features on this camera, is the variable ND. I think it is incredible, and I really hope that it goes on every camera that Sony puts out, because it's one of the best features on the camera in my opinion. Another person who might be very interested in picking up the FS5 is somebody who has been saying, I really wanted to go into a 4K production, and while using that, I already have, or I'm willing to get, a very powerful computer to be able to edit all this footage on. And you're gonna need something that's really, really fast, because that XAVC-L codec is very hard on your computer. So make sure you have something that's able to handle what you shoot here, or you have an editor who has the ability and access to a computer of that magnitude. The upgraded version, RAW plus the Odyssey, who is that for? That's for anybody who wants to shoot drama, action, thriller, sci-fi. Somebody who wants to do that on a feature scale, you can totally do that with this camera quite well with the upgrades. Now, that is quite a bit more expensive, but that is where this camera is really going to shine. I hope you enjoyed my review of the Sony FS5. This is a great camera, but you just got to work past the ergonomics of it, and if it's right for you, I highly suggest you rent it out and give it a shot. Be sure to go ahead and subscribe to our page as well, because every 2 weeks we're going to be focusing on a different camera. These 2 weeks we're going to be focusing on the FS5 and all of the different testing that I did on that. We're going to release those videos Monday through Friday for 2 weeks. After we put that out, then we're going to move on to another camera, maybe a RED, maybe a C300 Mark II, maybe a C500, maybe, I keep going to the C series, don't I? Reds and Aries and, you know, all different types of cameras. So make sure that you go ahead and subscribe, because you're going to want to see all the information we're going to be putting out on this. Thanks again for watching. My name is Matt Williams, and I'm with Camera Ambassador. See ya!